Hi everyone, I'm going to do the Module 2 wrap-up here, which will involve answering the top 2 or 3, I think or maybe 4 this time, most popular clarification questions. Before I get on to that, what I'd like to do first is to talk a little bit generally about the course. I put out a rubric that I'd like you to definitely have a look at for the course research question, the big 60% project. I hope that you're working on that. The first check-in is the 31st, so it's 5 days from now. What day is that in the week? It's Sunday, right? So this coming Sunday, the 31st of May, I'm looking for you to put in all of the work that you've done up to now on that course research question, right? So ideally what I'm anticipating is that you'll have written maybe 500 words in the first module, 500 words in the second module, 500 words in the third module. You might be up to about 1,500 words now. You've probably, which is about a third of the way there, which is good. Not quite a third, so 15 to 2,000 words, 1,500 to 2,000 words. You've got some references already in there. There's some evidence that you've been looking outside of our assigned readings. You know, really, again, I can't stress enough this. The point of the class, the point of this course is to, one, introduce you to international relations as a body of literature. And that involves giving you some readings, right? It involves just handing you a bunch of readings, which is what the reader is about, right? So the bare minimum, I want you to have read that, right? I mean, that's the, when I say bare minimum, that's not even enough to pass the class probably, but it's, you know, that's the first step. Read what I've given you. Use that, you know, you've been asking questions about it, you've been using it to come up with questions that will help you answer the bigger questions that you're dealing with in the course research question. So you're doing that, you're reaching outside of the readings as well. You're finding other readings. I've got that video on Google Scholar. There's other ways. I've been using the Web of Knowledge, which if you go into ASU Library and do Web of Knowledge, that's not that good for social sciences. I don't think there's a lot, you know, it does bring up some good recent, especially recent papers and in journals that will be helpful to you. You know, but it doesn't bring any books, I don't think. Anyway, so that's a good ASU Library. Type in the search bar Web of Science, and then I might check out, I think Web of Knowledge is a separate thing. I might check that out as well. I've used that in the past as far as I can remember. Anyway, I can't stress enough the importance of looking at outside material. That's what I want from you, for you from this class, right? That you've read some IR literature, you've found some IR literature yourself, you've used that to answer a big question about IR, like a big broad question about IR. And if you've done all that, then I'm happy that the class has met its goal. Okay, so the rubric's out for the course question, the course research question. If you look at that, that should help you and see where you'll be, depending on what sort of work that you're going to hand in at the end of the semester on that big 60% research project. All right, do get in touch with me if you have any questions about anything, right? I mean, I'm here to help. Don't hesitate to reach out. Sometimes people are hesitant to reach out for me. Don't worry about disturbing me or anything like that. I mean, that's my job, right? And I like to hear from you, right? I part of the reason why I have the job is because I enjoy doing it. I enjoy teaching students. So any questions at all that you have, feel free to reach out to me. Let me know if there's anything I can do to improve the usefulness of these videos. And remember, there are some other videos at the very bottom of the modules page where you'll find lectures that I recorded for this class, and also other clarification questions that I answered for other students in other semesters. So you'll find that at the bottom, I think just one of the semester, right? The spring, I put the most recent one in there. So you know, there's a lot of material out there for you to use. If there's anything that I can do to make that material more useful to you, you know, sometimes it's a hard question for students to answer because you don't know what's useful to you at the beginning of the course. But as you can see, what I'm expecting from you, hopefully you become more and more aware of what would be helpful to you. So don't hesitate to reach out and let me know how I can help you. All right. So from that now, I want to move into the clarification questions. And so the first one is by Garrett Rand. And it's this question, quite a philosophical question, which is good because we're reading Hobbes. So The Hobbes reading suggests that justice and standards of right and wrong are relative and arise in men belonging to a society as opposed to in solitude. This made me question whether there were universal moral ethical laws that people inherently follow. In the Edward Carr reading, Machiavelli believed that morality is the product of power. And that's a big part of Carr, right? Carr, one of the very early, maybe the earliest realist, right? He's a little bit before Morgenthau, I think, right? Who most people sort of point to as the sort of father of realism. We also read him this week, this module. But E.H. Carr, absolutely a realist authority, a very early realist authority. In the Edward Carr reading, Machiavelli believes that morality is a product of power. And E.H. Carr really wants to make that point very, very, and we'll talk about why in a second. How is there not an intrinsic sense or feeling of right and wrong in a human, aside from laws and justice systems set in place through politics? Also, is there, okay, first of all, that's a very difficult question for anybody to answer, of course. How is there not an intrinsic sense of feeling of right and wrong? But certainly realism is about whether that is the case or not. In a human, aside from laws and justice system, also, is there free will associated with the laws of every man's nature, a la Spinoza? Okay. So again, the philosophical depth of this question is great. It's a little bit deeper than I want to really go in that maybe I'm prepared even to go into, based on sort of where we are and what we're studying and what I'm reading. But I definitely want to talk about E.H. Carr and morality as a product of power, because for me, this is, and I think for lots of people, right, this is one of the essential elements of realism, right? E.H. Carr really does want to say this. In other classes, if we had more time, we might read Thucydides, right? They might have mentioned Thucydides in one of these articles. I don't remember, but of course, from Thucydides, he's writing on the Peloponnesian Wars, and then there's a very famous dialogue in that work called the Melian Dialogue, and it's quite short. Feel free to look it up. Maybe I'll attach it somehow to this module in Canvas for you. We'll find it online very easily, and I'll just bung it up there. The Melian Dialogue. And in that Melian dialogue, we have the Athenians come to Melos, a small island in the Aegean, I believe it's in the Aegean, during the wars that Athens is having with Sparta. And Melos wants to remain neutral in this war. Right? It doesn't want to join either side. It's a small island. It doesn't want to get involved in the war. And the Athenians land on the island. And so the dialogue is between the Athenians and the Melians, right? It's known as the Melian dialogue, because the Melians only get one dialogue in history, whereas the Athenians will get a lot of it. So it's the Melian dialogue. So the Athenians are basically saying, okay, open your gates. We're coming in to occupy the island, right? You're going to be on our side now. We've arrived here. And the Melians say, no, we'd like to remain neutral. We don't want to get involved in the war. We don't want to fight the Spartans. We don't want the war. And so they get into this discussion, and what the Melians are saying, look, we're small, we're insignificant, we're not doing you any harm. Why? We're not fighting. We haven't promised anything to Sparta. We don't want to promise anything to you. And the Athenians say no, because if we let you remain neutral, then we'll look weak, right? We sort of have to occupy you in order to look strong. Because if we let you go, then some of our enemies will think, maybe the Athenians are so they can't even deal with Melos, right? They have to. They're allowing them to remain neutral, and so it goes that direction. And then the Melians start to talk about justice, right? What is justice in this situation? And this is where it gets important for realism, right? Because the Athenians respond, and I haven't got it in front of me, but I can remember it almost word for word, but probably not quite word for word, obviously. Anyway, The Malians, so the Athenians respond that justice is only important between equal parties, whereas the strong do as they will and the weak suffer as they must. That is, it's archetypal, right? Archetypal to realism, and this is what E.H. Carr is getting at. It's not about morality. It's not about justice. E.H. Carr says, look, a lot of leaders, when they're talking, they try and make it sound as though, right, God is on their side, justice is on their side, morality is on their side. But in reality, that's not what international relations and relations between states. That's not what that's based on. It's based on power. It's based on what Thucydides gives us in the Malian dialogue. It's based on the strong doing what they can and the weak suffering as they must. Right? Whatever they want to do, whatever they can do, the strong will do it, and the weak just have to suffer. Right? And that's the morality, if you like. It isn't a morality, right? It's amoral. There's no morality. And any time, and so E.H. Carr wants all practitioners and all students of international relations to know that anytime anybody's talking about morality, they're justifying their own actions, which is really their own interests. And we learn, I think, more from his name's gone out of my head. I just said it probably a few minutes ago. Oh my gosh. Can I look him up now? I've forgotten the guy's name. Morgenthau. There. It actually didn't come up on the screen yet, but there it is. Morgenthau, Politics Among Nations. He tells us that interest defined as power. So you'll have read this in the book, but if we can get in, when we talk about state interests, it can get complicated. We can say, well, what is the state interest of the United States? Right? Is it about having oil flowing around the world? Is it free trade, open borders? Liberalism, democracy? Are those part of U.S. interests? Well, maybe for some people, but for realists, no. Interest means power. So, well, I guess if those things enhance the United States' power, then that's in their interest. That's how we know what in a state's interest is their power enhanced by it. Right? And so it's a really neat tool, actually. And I did this in the spring with the students, but you start to ask questions. I think we talked about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. Right? Is that in their interests? And for realists, it's very simple to judge that. Quite simple, right? You just have to say, okay, will this action increase their power or reduce their power? If it increases their power, then it's in their interest. If it reduces it, then it's not in their interests, right? So it all goes back to power. It all goes back to interests, but it's nothing to do. Although, the United States might stand up and say, we're invading Iraq because of human rights violations, because Saddam Hussein is a wicked dictator who's treating his people wrong. He's killing them, he's torturing them. Now, all of those things might be true. But to a realist, an archetypal realist, right, to E.H. Carr, it doesn't matter. That's not a reason to go to war. That's not a reason to fight. That's not a reason to pursue foreign policy. That's not something to take into consideration. So if we want to conduct good for realists, if we want to conduct good foreign policy, forget about any statements of intentions or good moral intentions or philosophy. Those are just justifications of what we were going to do anyway. Forget about all that. Look at what's in people's interests. Look, and by that, E.H. Carr means, and Morgenthau as well, look at what increases their power. That's what they're probably going to do, and that's what you should do. That's what you should do. You should try and increase your power. They'll try and increase their power. That's what should happen. That's how international relations should be conducted. And that is the very essence, if you like, the very inside kernel of realism. And so I think that's a good question. Thank you. I know that I didn't answer the nuances of the question about because it gets into things like human nature, right, which is a little bit deeper than we want to go. Although we want to recognize that human nature, from Hobbes, human nature, because another sort of tenet of realism is that it's a theory of the way international relations is conducted and how it should be conducted, but it's based on human nature. Right? Humans are not moral then for realists. They're not. Whether they how are they not, or how are they, or whether they should be, or anything like that. But they're not. Right? Political man is just interested in power. Right? And so even if we is it A.H. Carr or Morgenthau? I can't remember which one it is now, that talks about, well, we have to separate them. But man is an amalgamation, right? People are an amalgamation of political man, economic man, right, and all those other ones that I've forgotten. But for international relations, for realism, we're just going to consider him as a political man, because that's going to help us to predict easier, and it's going to help us to do better foreign policy if we use those suppositions. So that's quite a bit on realism there that I've sort of based on that question. A very good question there by Garrett Rand. Thank you for the question. Next one's by Daniel Green, which takes us a little bit further into this. Well, I'm going to go further with it, I think. Or in a different direction. We'll see. Yet, I forgot what it is. Hans J. Morgenthau makes the statement, yet, while the individual has a oh yes, this is a particular application, I think, of the morality in international relations. Because he's saying this, he's saying, okay, so I'll read the question. Yet, while the individual has a moral right to sacrifice him in defense of such a moral principle, the state has no right to let its moral disapprobation of the infringement of liberty get in the way of successful political action. Successful, right? Nothing succeeds like success. Morality set by the victors, all of those things, it's realism, right? That's about realism. So infringement of liberty gets in the way of successful political action, itself inspired by the moral principle of national survival. And then the question carries on, this needs clarification. It seems as though political realism is taken to the extreme in this situation. We'll see if we can remedy that a little bit, but maybe not too much, because it is fairly, I think it's fair to say that in terms of foreign policy that we're used to in the United States, at least rhetorically, realism is external, I think. Realism is extreme. Usually when US foreign policy makers and the media, usually when we're talking about US foreign policy, and even European foreign policy, whenever we're talking about whenever we're hearing it in the media from Western sources, and I'm only saying that because I haven't heard it from a lot of other sources, but usually we're talking about, we're probably in a liberal paradigm, right, where when we'll talk about liberalism in the next module, right? And so realism does jar with that quite a bit, but let's carry on. So it seems as though political realism is taken to the extreme in this situation. The statement, in my interpretation, is that the state, in the name of national security, has complete and total authority to ignore individual rights. Okay, I want to start to disagree here. All right, I'm going to write that down because that's where I want to come from and go to. Individual rights. All right, bear this in mind. Okay, does this not require or allow for some type of checks and balances to ensure individual civil liberties are not needlessly infringed upon? And is this really what political realism is about? Okay, before I begin disagreeing with this, and I strongly disagree, a better interpretation is needed. Good, all right, thank you, very wise. All right, so let's go back to these individual rights. Okay, the first one, the most famous one, the one that even Hobbes doesn't get rid of, right? This is what Hobbes is famous for. He gets rid of a lot of the sort of natural rights that would be in earlier writings, or in later writings for that matter, in Locke and those guys are, I forgot the Frenchman's name now, Rousseau. Locke strips it down to like the right to life, right? We all have the right to life. And so this right to life, and this is why we're reading Hobbes probably, this is one of the main reasons. So this natural right that we have to sustain our life, for Hobbes sets up a very powerful sovereign in his Leviathan, very powerful sovereign that can basically do whatever it likes. But the one right that we have left after Hobbes has taken it all away from us in his writing is the right to protect ourselves, the right to defend our life. Right? And of course, that right to defend our life is taken up by all sorts of other authors, and it's still very strong in our thinking today. Right? We all, if we think of the legal applications of this right, we even have the right to kill somebody else or multiple other people in order to defend our rights, even in civil society. All right. So this right to life is very, very strongly protected, and this that Morgenthau is talking about is based on that, basically, right? So, or we can base it on it. I'm thinking of ways that it's not based on it, but we can base it on it, and we will for the first pass through. We'll base it on that. And so the idea is, look, the state, the nation state, and again, Hobbes is great for this, is built up for the protection of the people in it, right? The protection of their lives. And this, I think, this is something that we would hear from statesmen and through the media and in films. This is a narrative that we get quite a lot, right? The military of the United States are there to protect those who are inside the state. Right? They're going to protect our lives. That's protecting our most important individual right, our right to life. Because without that life, all the other, and this is what sort of Hobbes gets into, I think, a little bit. But without this right, any other right that we have is useless, right? If we're dead, we can't exercise any of the other rights that we might have, right? The right to free speech, or the right to assemble, or the right to, buy and sell, free from, all those rights, the right to own property, that all goes away when we're dead, right? So that is then elevated to be the most important right. So realists care about that individual right, and they do put that as the prime right, the right, the number one right. And so the idea is, look, a nation state's set up to protect the lives, ultimately the security and the protection of the people who are inside of it. And so then anything that they do should be governed by that responsibility to protect the people inside of their state. All right. That's for realists and for lots of international relations people, actually. That's maybe the number one, that's seen as the number one goal of the state, is to protect the people inside of it, right? And maybe to protect its sovereignty as well, which we're not going to talk about right now. So they're going to protect the people in the state. And so then so what Morgenthau is saying here is, what if we got into some sort of hypothetical situation where, well, this wasn't so hypothetical, and I'm going to the Second World War, and I'm going to the Nazis, right? These are very stark examples, right? But they're the ones that come very readily and easily and openly to our minds. Let's say that no, that's not going to be moral, is it? That's going to be very immoral. While the individual has a moral right to sacrifice himself in defense of such a moral principle, the state has no right to let its moral disapprobation of the infringement of liberty get in its way of successful political action. Okay, all right. My examples might not be totally appropriate for that. So I'm going to try with half my brain think of another one while I carry on talking about this moral principle of national survival. So for states, then they have to survive. Without the survival, they can't do anything else. Without the survival, they can't protect the citizens. They can't protect any rights if they don't exist anymore. If the United States ceases to exist, the 10 first 10 amendments to the Constitution, right? The talk about protected rights, that goes away. There's no more U.S. Constitution because the U.S. doesn't exist anymore, right? So that's the first and foremost, is to stay alive, is to keep surviving. And then you can enjoy those other rights, right? And so basically, we're not allowed to, so for Morgenthau, then a state's not allowed. You and I might, we might be able to, on our own behalf, sacrifice our own lives for some greater cause, for some better cause, for some moral cause. And maybe we have a duty to do that sometimes. But a state can't, because a state's not just sacrificing its own existence, but it's sacrificing the existence and the rights of everybody that's in it, that relies on it. So it has to do anything it can to survive. I hope that assuages your, but still you don't have to maybe reduces your disagreement a little bit, but you still certainly can disagree with it. But that's certainly the rationale behind it. So that's what you'd have to deal with. If you're going to disagree with this, if you're going to write something where you disagree with this, great. Obviously, there's approaches outside of realism that would disagree that this is necessary, right? That this is a necessary rule. But know that that's the background to it. Know that that's the foundation of it, and know that that's how to tackle it, right? You've got to tackle that objection from realists that would say, yeah, but without state survival, we can't have any of the other rights. Okay, so notice that. All right, I'm going on now to, I might try to do these two last ones. I read Nicole's, right? Nicole Olesnovich, which is this one. Why are English-speaking peoples considered the dominant group of the world? Why do these people get to decide the basis of international morality? Without agreeing with the premise, Nicole, I don't know that that's always universally the case, what you're saying. I don't know what part of the reading you're sort of seeing that in, but any kind of an answer would have, a realist answer at least, would have to go back to what we've already been talking about, right? The Malian dialogue, the strong do what they will, the weak suffer what they must. It's fair to say that over the, since probably 1900, certainly since the Second World War, the United States, which is, predominantly English speaking, has been the dominant group in the world. And the reason that they've been dominant, if you ask a realist, the reason that they are the dominant group in the world is because they have the most power, which is quite simple, in that sense of the word. And power often to realists, power often means material capabilities, right? Size of the military, what sort of weapons you have, also economic power, right, will come in there too. How well developed your country is, that sort of thing. How much force and power you can muster against another state, right? Effective, and how effective that is. All right. So the United States is certainly the leader in that right now, and has been for at least 70 years, but 80 years, but probably more like 120. All right. Before the United States, it was very probably the British would be the predominant force. And so again, they're also English speaking by definition, I suppose, which is, much more so than the United States. And so, yeah, you've now got two powerful hegemons that are English speaking. But if you go back before then, right, you can get into the Dutch. You can get into the Spanish as well, which neither of which are English speaking, although Dutch is not too far away. If that means anything, maybe not. So a realist wouldn't necessarily say, wouldn't put any value at all, really, on culture, like language that you speak. The realists wouldn't care about that at all. They wouldn't want to talk about English-speaking peoples at all. They would talk about powerful states, right? Powerful nations, and then they would list them: the United States, Britain, the United Provinces, right? Spain. I'm taking this from another reading I think that we'll do later on in the semester, but in terms of who are the powerful states. These days, right, we would be talking about China, we'd be talking about the United States, India, Germany, France, Britain. I should have said Britain earlier, really, but okay, Britain, Japan, perhaps more and more so as their military power is increasing. So, why do these people get to decide the basis of international morality? And then, of course, that is what realists are saying. Yes, the powerful are the ones that are deciding morality. And it's not, and let's not worry about morality, they say, because that doesn't really mean anything. What means something is power, material capabilities, that's what means something. We don't do things because they're the right thing to do. Nobody does that. The Iranians don't do the thing because it's the right thing. The Russians don't do the thing because it's the right thing. We don't. The British don't. Nobody does. No state acts on morality. It acts on its interest in gaining power. What can we do to get more power? Right? And what can we do to get more power in order to survive, so that then we can do the other things that we want to do, because without surviving, we can't do anything else. So that's the way to go. All right, I'm going to end there. Hopefully that was helped you a little bit. If there was any sort of confusion about realism, I hope that that's cleared up the very sort of core of realist values there. That certainly is what we read in terms of Morgenthau and Kant and Hobbes, and that brings it together nicely. You've asked some great questions there that have really helped me to do that, I think, and sort of cater my response a little bit to what you're really thinking about. Please do give some thought about which questions you're upvoting, because those are the ones I'm going to answer. And so if there's one there that you'd like answering, let me know. There's a few that I'm just scrolling down to see if there's any really quick ones that I can answer before I end, because I've still got a little bit of energy left. But what is realism? Can you give example in a current event? And it's difficult, I'd say, because it's an approach, it's a theory, it's a way of looking at the world. But let's see, a current event. What's a current event these days? Maybe, I mean, we have COVID-19, but that doesn't lend itself very well to international relations between states. Realists are interested mostly in states and sovereign states. Ukraine keeps coming to mind, right? Russia, Ukraine, the Russia-Ukraine thing, right? So the Ukrainians are complaining, hey, the Russians are occupying, they're helping the rebels in our country, and they're occupying the eastern part of our country. And of course, the Russians are saying that they're not doing that, right? That's internal affairs to Ukraine. But whatever they're saying, that both sides are. For realism, it's hard to really believe. If you're a realist, it's hard to really listen to what people are saying and fully accept it. So anyway, but what we see, if we look at the event, we see that Russia is, let's assume, it's safe probably. The narrative is probably that Russia does not want Ukraine to integrate with Western powers, forces that are hostile to Russia. Right? Ukraine, like the Baltic states, was an integral part of the Soviet Union. It's right there on Russia's border. It's already seen the Baltic states join NATO, and so has an enemy on its border. It doesn't want Ukraine doing the same thing. So in order to prevent that, because as your opponent gets stronger, you get relatively weaker. So in order to prevent your opponent from getting stronger, let's deny them the Ukraine. Okay, one way to deny them Ukraine is to split the country, right? Have this sort of sleeping conflict in there that makes it so that you can't really be accepted wholly into the West. So we'll have this crisis. Now, we'll create this crisis where we support and train and perhaps supplement local Russian rebels with our own people, with our own arms and resources, funds, and we'll do that to weaken Ukraine and to strengthen ourselves. That's probably a realist interpretation of that conflict, right? And notice we didn't talk once about human rights. We didn't talk about culture. We didn't talk about, we did a little bit, but it shouldn't be a significant part of the story to talk about who's speaking Russian and who's speaking Ukrainian, about internal relations, about self-determination. None of that matters for realists. That's not part of realism. We'll find that comes in liberalism, but it's not realism. Realism is what's the power balance in Eastern Europe or in Europe generally, or what's the power balance between the West and Russia? And how do the Russians act in order to push that balance in their favor, and how do we act in the West to push that balance in our favor? And that's how we understand international relations. That's how we understand what people are doing. That's how we predict what Russia will do. That's how they predict what we will do. We will act to increase our power. They will act to increase their power. So that was a sort of a wild card one. It was a very short question, so it stood out, but it only had one upvote. But I guess in the end, it wasn't too bad a question. I enjoyed answering it. All right, so I will end that there for sure now. That's definitely enough. Please do watch these. There's a lot of good information in them, and they'll help you make sense of the different things that we'll be discussing.